Good afternoon. Got one small glitch. Doesn't look like. Hold on a second. I want to make sure that we are live on. Nope, hold on. See, this has happened twice now. Okay. Welcome to another episode of Turning the Table, sponsored by Benchmark 60. Turning the Table is the most progressive weekly videocast for today's food and beverage industry, featuring staff-centric operating solutions for restaurants and the hashtag new hospitality culture. My name is Adam Lamb, and I'm a career coach for chefs and hospitality professionals. And we have our co-host, Jim Taylor of Benchmark 60, here with us. Hi, Jim.
Adam, how you doing? Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time it is.
Right, exactly. And for whatever time you're catching the podcast. This is episode 119, forecast. We don't need no stinking forecast. And I know that's kind of a gag line, but I thought it was probably a really, really great time to talk about something that I know is absolutely critical for a restaurant business's success, which is being a master forecaster. And I know that that's something that you're really, really excited about too, Jim, because it's at the core of Benchmark 60 metrics and stuff.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's going to be a bunch of stuff that's going to catch people with their pants down right after the new year. So we were talking right before we got on it that January 1st is the deadline, or actually the activation date for 23 states in the U.S. that is going to activate an increased minimum wage. And it seems to be in the news right now because it looks like California has exceeded the signature count for actually putting it as a referendum to forestall that going into making that active in January 1st.
Yeah.
And my question when I saw that is like, so forestalling this increased minimum wage, who does that benefit?
Yeah, the example in California is extreme. And I'm actually in California right now, and I've actually spoken to some operators about this in the last week or so, and there's things all over the map about it, right? I mean, do you increase the quick serve restaurant wages that much, and what is the impact on full service? You know, do you wait on it and give people a chance to get ahead of it? You know, do you provide some recommendation on how to deal with it? You know, there's so many different conversations all going around at the same time about it, but you're right. I'm not exactly sure who it benefits either way.
So why don't we give the listeners or viewers kind of a broad stroke of what this CARE Act actually looks like?
Well, the one that I've been hearing the most about is this Fast Recovery Act, right?
That's correct.
About,
Fast Recovery Act.
Yeah, talking about moving quick serve restaurant units to, I believe it's $23 an hour. You know, in an effort to improve the overall livelihood and you know, work experience, I guess, for people who work in those environments. But the concern is that, you know, what is that going to do to the rest of the industry? What is that going to do to pricing? What is that going to do to the profit model in those restaurants? You know, if I'm an independent franchisee of a quick serve restaurant in California, and I only have one, and I don't have a ton of experience in restaurants, I mean, you're in a tough position there. The quote that I keep saying is, well, I'll just raise my prices 30%. But then you're well over a threshold for spender comfortability, right? So it's a tricky one.
I guess the other question would be like, what, because there's so many blended styles of service right now here in Asheville, North Carolina, you see a lot of, which, you know, walking into a lot of these restaurants, you'd think that they were kind of full service restaurants, except you're placing your order at the counter and you're picking up at the counter. So does that qualify you as being quick serve? Like, what's the definition of a quick serve restaurant?
Yeah, and I can't quote it off the top of my head, but there's a bunch of different sort of checkpoints that you have to meet in order to qualify to have to pay people that increased wage. But I believe if there's any kind of table service or cleanup service or anything like that, you don't qualify. But it's amazing. I was talking to a representative even from a company like 7-Eleven. I mean, some of those convenience store type places are starting to have little food service, you know,
sure,
wedges and stuff like that. And some of them are actually now going to qualify if they're franchised as quick serve, and they're going to have to pay their people $23 an hour. So there's so many different angles to it. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and before we got on the show, I know that we were just having a quick chat, and you said that you had just gotten an email from a client that said, "Hey, can we take a look at Q1 targets?" And it's the 8th of December.
Yeah. Well, you
And
made a comment when we first got on the show about this is a good time to be talking about forecasting. It might actually be the worst time to be talking about forecasting.
right,
I'm not sure which one it is.
right, because typically, I was really blessed to be brought in at the ground floor of a unique concept that was very first of its kind. Back in the early 2000s, it was the very first time a restaurant was incorporated into a movie theater, and that was Movie Co. Premiere in Boca Raton, Florida. And I was, it was my longest tenure in a spot, because that was about 6 years. Because it took us 2 years to actually try to clock exactly how people came through, because everybody's got somewhere to go. They've got a movie coming up and rushing service and stuff like that. And the other point of it was that service would change drastically based upon what movie was playing. So, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, now you've got, 90% women in there. It's all margarita pizzas and Caesar salads. And the next week it's a De Niro flick and you're doing all steaks and pastas. So for me, it became like this really great mental exercise. And how well could I forecast closely with these parameters? But I was always looking at it as a product exercise, not necessarily as a labor exercise. Do you know what I mean? And so I think the next evolution is like, how do you actually use forecasting to manage the workload of the staff such that not only that they get that they're being looked after, but in real time it's actually benefiting the restaurant, because you're staffed at an optimal level where you can ask for that second drink order, or you can ask for the dessert order without being rushed.
Yeah.
And I know you have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, lots to say about it. Yeah, I was actually to your point about the client asking about forecasting for Q1. I mean, if you haven't gone through that process yet, it's definitely too late. But
right.
At least in order to get the whole thing done. But we were talking before the show about making sure that we give people who are listening today a couple things that they can do. And I think the labor modeling and how to figure out how to best take care of your people and still give good service in Q1 when everybody knows in most markets the sales dip. That's a tricky process to go through. But I always talk to people about the first step being actually a customer behavior. Actually looking at how the customer behavior changes in order to start that process. Because if you think about what happens in December versus what happens in January in most markets, especially, the winter markets,
right?
People go out less and spend less in January than they do in December. In December, they go out more and they spend more when they go out. So, to make sure that we're still giving good service, protecting the employee experience, and, overall running a good business, you have to consider that. Because if you're not careful, you end up setting the same target or expectation around profitability for January as you did in December, and you end up forcing your team to work shorthanded a lot of the time just to get that result, which isn't good for anybody.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly valid point, and I don't think, certainly before meeting you, I don't think it's anything that I really took into a lot of account, this idea about customer behavior or customer spend, or what does it look like for someone to go out in December versus January. And I've spent most of my career in the back of the house, although I have a great deal of experience in the front of the house. But I just want to mention to, any back of the house chefs, directors of operations, or culinary directors, if you don't become a master forecaster, then you are always at the whim of everyone else. So it really behooves you to take some of these things into place and spend some time in the accounting office and start pulling apart some of this information. And the great news is that most of the POS systems out there right now are so well versed at being able to pull this information if you just know what you're looking for. So I guess I would ask Jim, like, what kind of data points should they be looking for if they're looking for accurately calculating customer behavior?
Well, in the back of house, the first thing I would recommend that any chef does if they're thinking about what's going to happen to their profit model in January is the first thing that they should be looking at is how many dollars in food is your kitchen producing for every hour that your employees work. And so let's say you get a restaurant that's producing $100 an hour of food.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not $100 per person, that's $100 as an average
Correct.
over the whole team.
Right.
If that's in December when people are ordering filet mignon and rack of lamb and the more high ticket entree items, that number, it actually probably should drop a little bit in January because people see their credit card statement
Sure.
and they're paying off Christmas and they might order chicken or they might order a salad or they might order something. There's the not only is it the cost side of things, but there's also the whole, I'm gonna have a New Year's resolution and lose some weight or something in January. So they eat differently.
Right.
And so that average, output number might drop to $90 or $85 for every hour worked. And so the whole profit model changes.
Right.
Right. But if you're trying to achieve the same labor cost number, you're going to actually have to run with less people, which could impact employee experience. It could impact food quality. It can impact customer experience. And the one we were talking about the other day is it could force your team to work overtime, which now you're paying people even more for every hour that they're working. And it
Right.
compounds how bad that looks.
Right. And I guess what I mostly wanted to say is that, this idea of forecasting or becoming a master forecaster, this isn't just a front of the house function. This is not a general manager function. This is everybody who cares about their operation, because you can drive that, because you can pull that information and it doesn't take anything except maybe a small Excel spreadsheet to be able to drive those numbers.
Sure.
And have a really productive conversation around the table when you're talking about Q2. Right. So we said, yeah, it's probably a little late for Q1. However, there's probably some things that you can do right now to impact that. But as we start getting closer to January, when we know those numbers are going to drop right off, it's important to understand that this is everybody's job. This is not just the general manager's job. So I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the general manager's job. It's the night manager's job. It's the opening manager's job.
Right.
It's, everybody needs to be aware of what that looks like.
Yeah, because it's, again, having a raucous conversation around the table can only serve the group because everybody's coming at it from their own particular sphere of influence. But if you're all looking at the same numbers, you can start to kind of flesh out some expectations that serve everybody, as opposed to, like you said, now you get in the middle of it and you're getting caught with your pants down a little bit. And now what do? Okay, so either going to raise prices or cut staff.
Yeah, which doesn't always go well. And we started a couple of years ago, we started calling this, or not calling it, referring to it as customer behavior instead of average spend.
Right.
And the reason for that was that, you call it average spend and it just kind of seems like the concept just kind of gets, well, it's just the average spend. It's just what happens, but if you start to think about it in terms of behavior of how your customer actually acts when they interact with your business, there's things like the December-January example that we use. There's things like, how do people behave when they go out for dinner on Monday versus on Friday? How do they behave on a birthday versus on a just go out for dinner? How do they behave when they order? And this was a good topic of discussion the other day with a group of people, was how do they behave differently when they order third party versus when they go out for dinner?
Right. Now with the advent of all, the Grubhub and all the delivery.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got into a good discussion the other day about, well, I don't want to use Grubhub or Uber Eats or any of these things anymore because I have to pay a fee. And when we started to actually peel back the layers, they had one business that was doing like 300 or 400 orders a week on third-party delivery, and another location that was doing 50. The average customer was spending $4.50 more for every transaction at the location that was doing heavier third-party delivery than the location that wasn't. So sure, they're paying some fees, but their total revenue was so much higher in that location that was doing more third-party because, and the analogy that we were laughing about is, if I go through the Dairy Queen drive-through and I want to get a Blizzard,
right,
I'm in my head about it and I'm probably going to get a medium. But if I'm sitting at home and someone's going to drop it off on my doorstep, you better know I'm ordering a large.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
right? And so there's that component to the behavior of how people interact or how they behave when they interact with your business that you have to be aware of, right? So
Right.
it's just a filter and different way to look at what's happening in terms of the model in the business.
So the one thing that we can look at right now is customer behavior and get into
Mm-hmm.
a really good conversation about, I think we can even use ourselves as examples of like, okay, so what's my behavior in December versus January, or
Sure.
ordering from an app versus being in person and having to sit in front of somebody as opposed to sitting in front of the TV. So what would be a second thing that operators could actually bring to bear right now that might assist them in making this transition, not only from in full season, I like to call Christmas to New Year's, holiday hell week,
Mm.
but then the bottom drops out, and if you're not prepared, then that first 10 days you're running lots of overtime
Yeah.
and way over payroll. So what's a second thing that operators can be looking at right now that might help cushion the blow a little bit?
Yeah, the second thing that I would encourage people to look at is what happens to your customer count, what
Mm.
happens to covers in January, because and this is happening in lots of different industries, not just restaurants, but there's lots of industries right now that are, they're saying, hey, we're looking good because revenue is up.
Right.
Everything's golden. Revenue's up. We're up 10, we're up 15, we're up 20% over last
Mm.
year, or even over 2019 in some cases, pre-pandemic.
Right.
But if that's being caused strictly by price increase and you're actually serving less customers,
Mm.
there's an issue there, right? So
Right.
we really encourage companies to look at what's happening with your customer count trend. And in January, typically people go out less.
Yep.
So, if you're expecting to see the same revenue number, that's one thing. But if it's happening because you've got less customers coming in and you're just seeing that same revenue number as last year based on the fact that your prices have been increased 2-3 times in the last year, there's an opportunity there, or at least something to be really aware of.
Yeah, especially with all the disruption in the with the supply chain, it's so easy to forget, right? That last month we raised prices 15%, and so by the end of that 45-day cycle, you're looking at a P&L and going, "Oh, look at us! Aren't we doing great?"
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, we can kid ourselves so easily, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think if a restaurant has raised their prices, let's say 10% over the course of the last year,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot have raised them even more than that.
Sure.
If you think about that, they could potentially be serving 10 or 15 customers a day less and do the same revenue.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's a slippery slope, right? Because you do that once, then you do it again, then you do it again. All of a sudden you're serving, 100 customers a day less. And it changes the model.
Well, and the profitability starts dropping, right? So there's that critical mass point where like neither one of those are actually working for you in your benefit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to kind of come back to this, this idea that Benchmark 60 is built around being able to be accurately staffed for any particular
Mm-hmm.
day part or shift or whatever, and having enough staff so that there's no wait at the host stand, or it's a negotiable wait at the host stand. You're not losing people to walking out. You're not losing money at the bar because people are getting shifted to the tables too quickly. That
Yep.
you have enough service staff on hand so that it's a well-paced hospitality dining environment, as opposed to, okay, where it's just feeding a trough. And I think that sometimes we kid ourselves during the busy period that, we're going to push all these people through, and it's going to be great because our cover counts are going to be high. And then comes this week period where all of a sudden people remember the last time they were in your restaurant that the experience wasn't that great. And now when there's a little bit more time to be had, they probably might make a decision to go somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure. And, we encourage people to actually stay away from, especially right now with what's going on with menu price increasing and that kind of thing based on inflation, to try to avoid looking at a fairly commonly used metric, which is sales per labor hour.
try to stay away from looking at that, because if, that can actually lead operators astray. Because again, if the prices have increased on the menus 10, 15, 20% over the last, a year or 18 months, that sales per labor hour number is going to look really good compared to what it used to.
Right.
It's inflated.
So what would be a better metric to use then?
Well, we would encourage operators first to look at how many customers they serve for every hour that your staff works. Because it's a more even playing field, right? The sales per labor hour concept, if you and I both go into a restaurant, you sit at one table, I sit at another table, and we have two servers, two different servers or waiters or waitresses, whatever term you want to use, taking care of us. Right. If you decide to order a steak and I decide to order chicken wings, the sales per labor hour at your table are higher than the sales per labor hour at my table. And if the staff are being measured as in terms of their performance on that, well, that number was driven by customer behavior, by what you decided to order versus what I decided to order. And so that can encourage decisions to be made in the business that might not be beneficial. But it also, if that steak used to be $38 and now it's $45, right? It's going to look, again, that number is going to be inflated and actually could confuse some things. So
yeah,
we try to stay away from that.
I'm reminded of the fact that, this idea of productivity is something that's used in almost every other industry out there, especially around manufacturing, because it's very easy to predict, units per hour worked. And yet the restaurant industry has been like almost, I don't want to say reticent, but, there's a lot of people that will argue for their limitations and say, well, that won't work for me. Mm-hmm. Like I can't make sense of that because everything's dollars to dollars as opposed to counts per count. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that looking at things in terms of customer count per hour is more about people. I mean, that's always the first thing that the first argument that I would make. It's more about people. So it's more about employee experience. It's more about customer experience. It's more about, if you're always serving 5 customers for every hour, whether it's Monday or Wednesday or Friday or New Year's Eve or Easter or any day, if you're always serving 5 customers per hour, you're going to have a really consistent experience for your staff and for your employees, right? But if we look at it in terms of sales per labor hour, if you have $100 one day and $20 the next day, well, that $100 could come from one guest. Sure. And that $20 could come from 5 guests.
Yep.
Right. It doesn't tell us. So it could actually, you could end up having a staff member that has to serve 100 customers to generate $100. And you could have another staff member that has to serve 1 customer to generate $100. So you've got this one staff member that's bored and not doing much. You've got another staff member that's running around like a chicken with their head cut off and they're stressed out. Right. So it's not a consistent experience. So we definitely focus more on the customer count versus the number of staff working to create more consistency.
So I know this is a loaded question, but why is it important to look at the customer or staff experience versus something that's non-arbitrary and non-moving, such as like dollars per hour?
Well, I mean, everybody wants the customer to have a good experience, right?
And you would think, sure.
You would think. And
or they're just in it for the cash and they don't give a shit about anybody's experience.
And
except theirs.
In terms of the staff, well, retention is the new cool, right? You gotta take care of your people or they're gonna leave.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, that was a softball, but again, these are. Like you throw it out there so blithely, like because this is what you live and breathe, it makes complete sense to you, and it does to me as well. We're gonna shout out from the Cayman Islands.
Oh, nice.
Chef Perez Rojas. Hola, ¿qué tal? Welcome, and I know that Elias is also checking us out from Italy. Another huge raving fan.
Yeah,
it's just listen. After you've been beaten down to a certain point, I get that it's really, really hard to see people whether it's your staff or the customers, as anything but numbers moving through your periphery. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to like open up your heart and connect with each and every one of them, because if you did, you'd be completely overwhelming and weeping all the time because they're having
Yeah.
such a great experience. So I want to continue to kind of bring it back to this humanistic way of viewing business, because I think that for most of us who've decided to join the hashtag new hospitality culture, it's because we realize that that's the reason that we got into the business in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to lose sight of that along the way. So this point number 3, Jim, would you say that that's probably customer per hours worked versus sales per labor hour worked?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
And
make sure.
and just be aware of how many people your team has to serve in order to get the results you want to get. How hard do they have to work? Because, and this is a line sort of we use regularly. There's a difference between hard work and having to work too hard.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with hard work, right? Like, everybody should go to work and work hard.
Yeah, it should be work.
But
yeah.
having to work too hard causes stress, causes anxiety, causes burnout, and especially in the restaurant industry, it causes turnover.
Right. That's
Right?
probably the biggest kind of hanging chat out there, is that, if we're losing staff because they're overworked, and we have a revolving door at the front and at the back, basically, because people are coming, showing up for a couple and then leaving. There's all kinds of numbers that have been thrown out there, but it's anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 every single time you have to replace an hourly employee.
Yeah.
Every single time. And for those operators who are like, well, I can afford that. Well, can you really? With a broken supply chain, with prices going through the roof, with recession on everybody's mind. We were talking about this right before we got on. Like, is the recession going to hit, or isn't it? Like, we don't know. And here we're moving through this glorious period of increased revenue and guest count in the next 2 weeks. And yet all of us know that, the song ends at some point, and we all got to stop the dance. Right?
Yeah.
Come January 3rd or 4th, forget it, man. Now we're scrambling around looking for solutions to that problem, when in fact, if we'd have been a little bit more proactive, we probably could have clocked that, like, what, in September, October?
Yeah.
Like quarter to quarter.
And the scary thing, and I think that this is going to actually hit the industry harder this year than it does in most. The scary thing is that the old way of approaching this in restaurants, which, if you've had any interaction with me or with Benchmark 60,
Yep.
you realize that we very strongly believe that the old way of running restaurants is dead.
Yep.
You can't do it the same way anymore. But that's, that inevitably there's a bit of this that's going to happen in our industry in January in general, is that the old way of addressing things when revenue drops, or when labor cost goes up, or when profit, is cut hard, work hard, cut harder, work your day off, do your admin at home, all of that stuff. And it's, I worry that that's what's going to happen really aggressively in our industry this year in the new year, is that it's just going to really quickly flash back to cut as hard as you possibly can. And that
as quick as you can.
As quick as you can. And that it negatively impacts the customer, the staff, the experience, the whole thing.
Listen, I think that everybody would agree that the last 3 years have seen enough disruption in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that probably nobody could have predicted 4 years ago. If you and I were sitting in a room doing a forecast for
no chance
2019, forget it. Yet, in case everybody's asleep out there is a tropical depression out there off the coast of Florida, which is one of the rarest things, because season ended in November, and there's the possibility of another tropical storm barreling our way, right at a time when all of us should be kind of focused on just having fun in our operations. So I get how hard it is to run an operation well in the midst of these disruptions. And I also know that there's a deeper cut, that if you can shift to metrics that make more humanistic sense based on experience, customer spend, customer count, how many customers per hours worked, that in the long run it will serve you a lot better than the way we've always done it, because the way we have done it doesn't work anymore. So
Yeah, 100%.
so how much longer you got in where's it, Palm Springs?
Yeah, we're in Palm Springs, a little courtyard right now. Sitting here having my coffee outside in the morning. It's nice. A little different than Canada. We're here for another, I don't know, 10 days or so.
And when you left it did dump a bunch of snow, right?
It snowed 6 inches the day before we left. Yeah.
Well, we can't wait for you to finish your holiday so we can all get back to work. So thanks very much,
good.
Jim.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
We really appreciate everybody tuning into this episode of Turning the Table. And next week, we're going to have Kelly Featheringham. So this is session 2 of her ABCs, yes, of leadership. That's going to be a great episode. So we really look forward to having her on and seeing you soon, Jim.
Take care.
Thanks. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.